we want to do here is get a nerve impulse movement from the time you decide you want to do it in the brain to the neuromuscular junction. So we'll get that nerve impulse movement and talk about how it moves through the nervous system. Let's start off with the brain. In the brain, the nerve impulse movement, you want to decide to do it, you do that in the precentral gyrus. It crosses the corpus callosum to the postcentral gyrus. It's more the motor side of things. It decides it's going to do something. It travels down the medulla, and at the medulla it crosses, it's refined. 75% of the impulse travels down what we call an anterior tract, 25% down a posterior tract or route. That's to ensure the impulse gets there. And then once it gets down to where it's going to exit, let's say it wants to go to the bicep, then it goes out what we call an anterior horn. It's going to travel down the neuron. A nerve impulse movement gets down the spinal nerve and down the neuron by what we call by means of depolarization. In depolarization, so you have the nerve. Potassium and sodium are two known elements. With the two, we think of them as electrolytes. Sodium, Na+, is extracellular. Potassium is intracellular. That's the case. What happens to depolarize? Let's say we get a nerve impulse. We want to move that nerve impulse down the cell, down that neuron. Sodium rushes in, changes the polarity, and pushes it. Sodium rushes in, changes the polarity, and pushes it. Sodium rushes in, changes the polarity, and pushes it right down the neuron. We call this depolarization. It instantly repolarizes. Just like muscle, it's all or nothing principle. It completely sends that signal or it doesn't send it at all. So depolarization. Sodium rushes in, changes the polarity inside the neuron, pushes the impulse down the neuron to where you want to get it. It instantly repolarizes by the sodium-potassium pump. So once it gets to the neuromuscular junction, let's say here's the muscle. And here's our junction. To get across the junction, a chemical is released. We call it a neurotransmitter. It's acetylcholine. A-C-E-T-Y-L-C-H-O-L-I-N-E. Acetylcholine carries that impulse across to the neuromuscular junction, and there it triggers the release of calcium to go into the muscle and allow sliding filament theory to happen. So go back and review the sliding filament theory. Now we've connected the dots a little bit. Start at the brain. Precentral gyrus. We decide we want to do something. Crosses the corpus callosum to the postcentral gyrus. Motor cortex. Travels down the medulla. Signals switches across the sides. Remember, right brain controls left side of the body. Refines the signal. 75% down the anterior tract, 25% down the posterior tract, exits the anterior horn. Remember, each vertebrae, nerves come out of the vertebrae, anterior horn, and travels down the neuron. It travels down the neurons by means of depolarization. Depolarization is sodium rushes in, changes the polarity where potassium is at in the neuron, and pushes an impulse down. Once it gets to the neuromuscular junction, acetylcholine is released, carries the impulse to the muscle. Once it gets to the muscle, it triggers the release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Remember, we'll review that. And once calcium travels into the muscle, it inhibits troponin and tropomyosin, the inhibitors, and it allows actin and myosin to slide on each other. And that is nerve impulse movement through the neuromuscular junction, and then a review of the neuromuscular junction. Watch this video a couple of times. Draw it out like you have the other things. Label it. Say it out loud. Write it out. The more you review it, the more you watch it, the more you write it out, the more you remember it. This will come into a lot of importance when you start talking about dehydration. What happens when you sweat out electrolytes and you don't have enough potassium and sodium? If you don't have enough potassium and sodium, then you've got a problem. You will get into lack of nerve impulse movement. If you have a lack of calcium, let's say you're osteoporotic, you have osteoporosis, you don't have good calcium, you don't take enough calcium, you don't have the calcium built up in the sarcoplasmic reticulum to go into the muscle cell. Or you've sweated out that electrolyte, you don't replace it, you get into problems. So this is important when you get into water retention and things of that issue of sodium, potassium, and calcium. 3 very important electrolytes, especially for nerve impulse movement and muscle contraction. Review this a few times and then go on in the slideshow.